Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Luca Nuvoli, and I'm a communication analyst at ENTSO-E. I hope you can all see me. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for joining this webinar. So before starting the webinar, just some housekeeping rules and a brief introduction. The summer outlook was published last Monday, 31st of May, along with the winter review 2020-2021. And the aim of this webinar is, of course, to present the findings of this publication. I would like to introduce you to the presenter, Lukas Galdikas, the adequacy specialist here at ENTSO-E. Good afternoon, Lukas. Thank you very much for your time. Some housekeeping rules. The presentation will be followed by a 5-minute break, and after the 5 minutes break, we would like to hear from you. So you will be able to ask your questions after the break. You can do so by raising your hand. We will unmute you, and you will be able to take the floor and ask your question. Let me just mention the fact that this webinar is being recorded. Yeah, the webinar is being recorded. So just you know, for privacy issues, we just make this clear at the start of the webinar. The recording will be available on our YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe, and also don't forget to follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn for the latest updates on ENTSO-E. So as you know, the adequacy, the seasonal outlooks are aimed at assess the situation, the adequacy situation, to prevent and mitigate risks linked to security of supply. And the aim is also to inform all the interested parties about the adequacy situation at the pan-European level. So, okay, now I can leave the floor to my colleague Lukas, adequacy specialist at ENTSO-E, that will present the main findings of the Summer Outlook 2021. Thank you very much. Lukas, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you, Luca. I hope everyone can hear me. Indeed, thank you, Luca, for introducing me, and it's my pleasure to be here today and present our findings of Summer Outlook 2021, where we assess the system adequacy of the pan-European power system. Starting straight away, maybe with what we are doing and why, just a brief recap. So this is our typical or most well-known products related to the security of supply analysis and grid development plan. So these are the 4 key products. And if you start from the very left part, which takes a look at the longest time horizons in the future. These are namely 10-year network development plan and European resource adequacy assessments. And those are looking really a few years ahead, and tries to support decision makers with the information about a potential situation in the future. And this should help in general to make any policy decisions and investment decisions for the relevant stakeholders. Whereas closer to the real time, we have the seasonal adequacy assessments, namely the seasonal outlook and the week ahead adequacy assessments, which are performed by the regional security coordinator, which are looking for the near future and tries to assess adequacy situation in that time frame. And namely, these findings are supporting to make any operational decisions, whether it would be adjustments of the planned outage schedules or else. So, and naturally, as we come closer to the real time, the more refined those adequacy results are, and the more information we know about what can happen actually in the real time. So, so today we will focus on the seasonal adequacy assessment results, where we take a look at the adequacy situation up to the 6 months ahead, and we will present the results of those for you today. Nevertheless, as I just mentioned, the closer to real time we go, the more certain we are about this information. So that means that, in general, all the findings from the seasonal adequacy assessment are still being refined and closer to the real time, namely through the week ahead adequacy assessments, because the situation in the power system is continuously changing. So all the findings in our report and assessments are only valid as long as you consider that we perform this assessment with the information which we do in April. So just bear in mind this, but still the findings should be quite representative to what can happen actually in the future. So diving more particularly to the summer outlook and what do we do and how do we do, just to make it completely clear how do we work, is that first of all, what we are doing is we are assessing the adequacy for the coming season under normal market operational conditions, meaning that we consider all the information all the information which we have at our disposal. In this case, we refreshed some information in early April, and then in addition, what we do in this step, we are only considering all the resources which are available in the market, meaning that first of all, we are not taking a look at any extraordinary measures or resources which could be taken in case of the supply scarcity, but rather we check if there could be a supply scarcity in the market. So is there a risk that there would be not sufficient supply in the ahead markets, as for example. Then after we do this assessment, we try to take a look at the step 2 if in those places where we see the adequacy risks, there would be any adequacy after activation of non-market resources. So non-market resources naturally don't exist everywhere, but in some particular places, they are designed for a specific reason to address those potential scarcity moments, which could be not addressed through the available resources in the market. And then in this case, in the step 2, we are taking a look at those available non-market resources, and we are checking if those would be sufficient to cope with the adequacy risks. And here we are, so in general, it is exactly the same assessment as in step 1. It's just that we have additional resources which should be activated by TSOs or other mechanisms in case there would be a scarcity in the market. And here we also consider European cooperation, meaning that we also consider that the neighboring system operators may be supporting their neighbors with the non-market resources which they would have at their disposal. So after the step, we identify the risks of lack of supply for the consumers through these generic measures. However, still, in general, it doesn't mean that there would be a necessarily adequacy or it doesn't mean that consumers would necessarily be curtailed as such, because in reality, then the operators also takes a look at the spot in case of the lack of supply, and they try to investigate if there are any further measures which could be activated to avoid the consumer shedding. These could be like voltage regulation and etc. But these are really situation dependent, and their availability can vary from time to time. So yes, but anyways, after this step 2, we are quite aware of what could be the risks that the TSOs could face challenges to supply the consumers, and that they may need to look for extraordinary measures to cope with that lack of supply. And then last but not least, we proceed to step 3, depending case on case actually, but like this time we also proceeded also to the step 3, where we perform some ad hoc investigations in some special occasions. So like for this summer outlook, what we took a brief look was a solar eclipse, which is expected this June in coming days, and if it could cause any potential lack of supply for the consumers. And then in addition, we invested a bit of time on further result investigations, to which I will be coming back soon. So all in all, these are our 3 key steps which we are performing. So first of all, we are checking if there would be a sufficient amount of supply through the markets. Then, as a step 2, we are checking if we identify any risks in step 1, if any specifically designed resources to cope with lack of supply in the markets would be sufficient to cope with the adequacy risks. And afterwards, in step 3, we make any special ad hoc investigations to screen our adequacy situation in the European power system. Just in a couple of slides, I will be presenting the findings of our results. But before that, I could just briefly mention about the findings which we identified when we were preparing for the seasonal adequacy assessment. So first of all, on the left part of the slide, you can see our information which we had about the thermal capacity change during the season. So that means from June until end of September. What we see is a continuous trend of some gas power plants being commissioned in the European power system, whereas hard coal and lignite keeps on being decommissioned in the European power system. This may indicate that there are probably more opportunities for flexible generation, such as gas units. And nevertheless, the key finding is that still the total capacity change, total thermal capacity change throughout the summer shows a decreasing trend. It's not a substantial when we take a look at the complete thermal fleet and European thermal fleet, but still it shows a trend that the thermal capacity decreases in Europe, which is just a situation which we have in the pan-European system. Further on, what we show also on the right hand of the slide is the planned unavailabilities of thermal units. So these are unavailabilities which we knew about in April, about how much of the generation might be not available during the summer. So these are the outages, for example, for the maintenance or overhaul reasons. It could be one example. So we cannot expect them to be available for adequacy reasons. And then in addition, these may also include some unplanned outages. So meaning that some outages which are as a result of mechanical failure of the power plants. However, these are only the ones which were known in advance before the assessment, meaning that this unplanned outage happened maybe in April, maybe in March, maybe in February, and just the works to repair those power plants are taking also some time into the summer. So these are of course also taken into account. And the main trend which we see here on the screen is also quite similar as we saw last year and a bit also before, is that at the early summer period here, early June, we see that the planned outages are quite high, a bit higher than during the rest of the season. But this is probably a result due to the seasonal patterns of demand changes as the temperatures tend to increase, especially in July and August. And all the power plants are, especially in the southern countries, are trying to prepare for the summer peaks. And this is why we still see the planned outages slightly higher than for the rest of the season here. So these were the two main findings which we found about the state of the power system before we actually proceed with the adequacy assessment. We have also processed the information even further more, but you can find more details in the report, or else if you will have any particular questions, you can try to raise the questions at the end of this presentation, and I would try to answer them to the best extent which I would be able. So having this information about the power system and some additional one, we proceed with the adequacy simulations, and here on the screen you can see the results of our adequacy assessment. And we present here the two maps. As you remember, in step one, we consider the normal market operational conditions, and the results of this step one is presented on the left-hand side of the map, and then the results of step two, where we consider also non-market resources, are presented on the right-hand side of this slide. The maps themselves, in general, present the relative expected energy not served figures, which in general presents the ratio of the consumption in the country, which is expected to be at risk for not being supplied. So this metric really helps to a certain extent also to compare the situation between the countries. And this is actually quite handy for our analysis. So nevertheless, what we see here from the adequacy risk under the normal market conditions is that we found out, let's say, rather common risks in Malta and Cyprus here. These are quite common in those rather isolated power systems, especially during the summer. However, we also identified some risks in Ireland this year, which is not that common actually, and this is what attracted our attention a bit. And I will be coming back to this specific case a bit later, and I will discuss the situation in Ireland just in a couple of slides. Nevertheless, the key results are rather favorable because we found only the risks in those rather isolated places. We couldn't identify any risks in the central part of Europe. And what we also found out was that after the activation of non-market resources here, just as I'm trying to present with the arrows, we see that the risks in Malta, actually in Malta, those risks decreases quite substantially. This is due to the same reason which I tried to explain before, because in in some power systems, there are specifically dedicated resources to cope with the adequacy risks, which could be seen if only the market resources would be considered. So in Malta, there are some resources dedicated to be activated in case of supply scarcity, and these indeed help to mitigate those risks in Malta substantially. On the other hand, the risks in Ireland and Cyprus do not change, and this is due to the same reason as due to the reason that there are no specifically designed non-market resources in those power systems. However, like in Cyprus, the risks are rather marginal, and these could happen only under the extreme conditions. So this is something common because we probably shouldn't expect that every year we wouldn't see any risks in all power systems. It's natural to see some risks under the extreme conditions, maybe a heat wave combined with the high thermal power plant outages or many other possible scenarios, but small risks could be anticipated in general. So these are our key results about the adequacy, which are being presented on this slide. And I'm happy actually to even proceed further on and dive it into a bit more detail, because for us, it's not only important what are the risks in general, but also when those risks could be expected. So here you can see a line chart of the adequacy risks in those three given countries. And in the light blue color, you can see the risks under the normal market conditions, whereas the dark blue line or bar represents the risks with the activation of non-market resources. So as you see here in Malta, they are basically diminishing completely, which indicates that those resources are serving very well. Nevertheless, like what this graph actually tells for us is that in Cyprus and Malta, we have this rather clear trend that the risks slightly start increasing towards the middle of summer, and then it starts decreasing. This is the case in Malta and Cyprus, and this is mainly as a result due to the seasonal pattern of the consumption, because in the middle of summer, the higher temperatures sometimes can be expected during the heat waves, and naturally they are increasing the risks of they are naturally increasing adequacy risks. So this is indeed, as I just mentioned, something what we could expect in general, seeing occasionally. Nevertheless, what we see in addition is the risks in Ireland, and here the things get a bit more interesting. We see the risks that they are notable at the beginning of summer, as well as at the end of the summer season, which is actually here around September month. And we, frankly enough, we cannot really explain it in the same manner as for Cyprus and Malta, as in Ireland, the consumption pattern remains quite flat during the summer. There are only a very, very minor variation throughout the summer. So this is something where we were very keen to investigate further on. So in the coming slide, I will be coming to this point. Yeah, to conclude, these are our findings that in Malta and Cyprus we see some risks which are rather expected, considering the seasonalities of those power systems, whereas the risks in Ireland, it was these are worth to pay some attention, some additional attention. And this is what we are going to do. So after we saw these results, we proceed also to an additional investigation. So we had these step-free ad hoc investigations. And on the right-hand side, we have this Ireland case. I will be coming back to this quite soon. And on the left-hand side, we had also an investigation, a short investigation of the impact of solar eclipse on the European system adequacy. So what we did for this summer outlook, we try to estimate if there could be a potential risk on TANF2 due to the solar eclipse in general. And what was our finding is that it doesn't have any additional impact. And let's say one of the reasons is that those, at least the two countries where we identified, so Cyprus and Malta, they don't even fall under the area of solar eclipse. Whereas in Ireland, there is a very small amount of the solar generation. So this is not really impacting the adequacy situation in those power systems. And in addition, for the rest of Europe, especially in the Central Europe, where we have more developed solar generation, we also couldn't notice any additional impact for the adequacy, meaning we don't see a risk that there may be not sufficient generation to supply consumers. However, yeah, I have to be very careful here and distinguish you that we are in the summer outlook. We only assess this adequacy situation, so we compare if there could be if there would be enough of generation to supply the consumers on an hourly basis. However, TSO community is still trying to prepare for a potential operational challenges in continental Europe, which can be more caused by the sudden changes of the solar generation, which can change substantially just in a few minutes. But this is out of the scope of the summer outlook, and for more information, I think that you could follow up on our website later this month, and we hope that we will be able to share you some extra information about this. So long story in short, for the solar eclipse impact, we don't really see any impact on the European system adequacy as such, whereas we will remain still alert for any kind of potential operational challenges which can be caused by sudden solar generation changes. So this was our first ad hoc investigation. Whereas the second ad hoc investigation, as I mentioned, it was related with the Ireland. And what we found out actually is that adequacy risks in Ireland are really driven by the pure or poor reliability of all power plants. So like at the beginning of season, we have some power plants being unavailable here because of some failures earlier before the summer, and they are still in the repair phase. And then even later on during the summer or during the year, also there could be additional failures of those power plants as well. So what we observed is that actually the reliability of those power plants can be quite poor and can cause additional challenges. So this can be here noticed actually this kind of aligned the peaks of unavailability of thermal units, which we already know. In addition, any additional unplanned outages can cause additional challenges here as well. So this is about these first couple of parts of risks at the beginning of the summer, whereas the end of the summer actually it appears mainly due to the interconnection planned outage between the Ireland and Great Britain Island, which reduces potential support from the Great Britain Island here. However, in general, these risks may be only available probably if there would be additional unplanned outages of the thermal units, as well as actually the situation in Ireland very much depends on the wind generation. And I mentioned wind generation because there could be many instances where a large share of the consumers can be supplied solely by wind generation. So then in reality, the actual situation will very much depend on the actual operational conditions. So actual unplanned outages of the thermal power plants and the wind generation itself. So the TSOs will, of course, remain very alert, and they will follow the situation closer to the real time. And naturally, if it will be possible, they will take any corrective measures if those could be available. So these were our key findings on these ad hoc investigations and overall the adequacy situation. So in conclusion, so we found out that we identified the risks in Malta, Cyprus, and Ireland. Risks in Malta and Cyprus are generally minor, especially when we consider the activation of non-market resources. Whereas we spend additional extra time to investigate what is happening in Irish power system. And we found out that some risks of lack of supply for consumers can happen. These risks are mainly driven by the poor reliability of the power plants. Nevertheless, the actual situation is very dependent on the wind generation in Ireland and in the Northern Ireland as well, which can also support the Irish power system. And furthermore, the last touch was the solar eclipse impact, and the solar eclipse really does not have an impact on the adequacy, which checks that if the available supply, available generation and imports are sufficient to supply consumers. So solar eclipse doesn't really pose these risks. However, some operational challenges may be expected in places with the high solar generation. However, there is a dedicated team which is working on this topic, and hopefully there will be in coming days some additional communication on this topic. So this was all my slides which I have to present to the viewers. So Luca, what do you think we should do now next?
I suggest, thank you very much, first of all, Lucas, for your presentation. I suggest indeed we take a 5-minute break. In the meantime, if you wish to ask any questions, you can already raise your hand if you want, and you know, I will pick up your questions. You will be able to take the floor and ask your questions. So we will come back at 20 to 3 o'clock, 20 to 3 p.m. if you agree. See you later. See you in 5 minutes.
All right, I will be back in 5 minutes as well.
Yeah. So welcome back, everyone. So I see that in the meantime we have a question on bidding zones. Thank you very much. So how did you split adequacy risks between Ireland and Northern Ireland, given that SEM is only one bidding zone? Lucas.
Yeah, thanks, Luca, and thanks, Francois, for this question. The only way how we managed to is because we assess the adequacy individually for each of the zones in Ireland. So we have two separate zones for the Ireland as such, and then we have a separate zone for the Northern Ireland area as well. So we have two ENTSO-E members, namely AirGrid, which provides us information about the Irish power system, and then we also have Sony, our Sony system operator, as our member as well, who also contributes their power system data. And then, of course, we have also the information about how much they are interconnected between themselves. And having this information, we naturally perform the assessment for the whole pan-European system at once, but then we can see the risks individually per each study zone which we have. So yeah, so long story in short, we actually have a separate zones in our assessment.
Okay, thank you very much, Lucas. Yeah, in the meantime, while I encourage you to ask your questions, I would like to ask you to remind first of all that seasonal outlooks are one of the main ENTSO-E deliverables, and that we publish seasonal outlooks twice a year, along with other very important deliverables that stem from the European legislation. And at ENTSO-E, we are very committed to implementing this new legislation, and since it's the requisite to in the end enable energy transition. But maybe coming back to this specific publication, Lucas, when can we expect the next seasonal outlook, namely the winter outlook?
So yeah, indeed. So just after this public webinar, actually, the team will start preparing for the winter outlook, and we'll keep on working. And our expected date when we will publish it, it will be in late November, as usually. So this is our common timeline, that we perform this assessment like twice a year. Meanwhile, I can also add, just as Luca just mentioned, that, and as I showed at the beginning of presentation, that we have also various other products. So in the system development team, together with all transmission system operators, so we have various study teams, we are already preparing the European Resource Adequacy Assessment analysis, where we take a look at the expected adequacy situation 2 years in advance. And this should be published somewhere this autumn as well. So I could just recommend everyone just be aware and take a look also on our website for the fresh news on this report, as well as it also has a lot of very interesting information about what could happen in the further future as well.
Thank you, Lucas. Maybe, yeah, one quick word regarding the new methodology. I mean, we all know that we've been using this new assessment methodology since last year, since the last year summer outlook. But what I wanted to ask you and to know more about is if, having implemented this new methodology, do we keep maybe improving it between each seasonal outlook, and what are in the end the benefits of this new methodology?
Yeah, so the key benefit of the new methodology is that compared to the old methodology, now we are able to assess the seasonal adequacy situation more in detail, meaning that we now perform the adequacy assessment for each hour in the coming season. So we assessed all the possible or majority of possible scenarios for the coming season for each hour. So we consider also possible scenarios when demand is rather low or rather high due to the heat waves or cold spells. We also combine it with the possible wind and solar generation, with the possible hydrological conditions in the coming season. So we have it now, this kind of assessment very much in detail. So each hour is assessed under various possible scenarios, and like for this summer outlook, we assessed like 1,400 I guess scenarios in each hour, which are also which are also interdependent from hour to hour. So it's I would say more robust assessment after the adequacy assessment methodology update. And just yeah, referring back to the same European resource adequacy assessment. So now both projects uses quite similar approach to assess the adequacy assessment in the concerned timeframes. The only probably major difference now is that European resource adequacy assessment covers various additional fields, like they are also trying to assess the possible basically, they are trying to assess the economic viability of some power plants, so try to address what are the risks that some power plants can be decommissioned and not support the adequacy in the far future. Whereas in the seasonal, we don't have this as a concern, because we are pretty confident that if we have some power plants already, we still have them in the power system. We can probably rely on them unless we already have the information that they are being decommissioned in the near future.
Okay, thank you, Lucas. Okay, I guess we don't have any more questions. That's a sign that everything was clear from your presentation. So that's great to see. Before concluding the webinar, we just wanted to let you know, to inform you that this Friday there will be the first session of InnoGrid, which is the 10th our 10th edition of InnoGrid. You know, one of the leading events, ENTSO-E events, in cooperation with EDSO. An event focused on innovation. For this 10th edition, we will focus on the role of the transmission on the power networks to enable the energy transition, and also leading European consortiums will have the opportunity to showcase their innovation project focused on topics such as flexibility, digitalization, renewable integration, and the project enabling new market opportunities. So again, one of the leading events as far as innovation in the power system is concerned. Don't miss it. Don't forget to register on the InnoGrid website for the two sessions taking place on the 4th and 11th of June on Fridays from 9:30. And this Friday, the session will be opened by Commissioner Kadri Simpson, and Christian Zilgerson, the ACER director, will also take place in one of in the first panels, and also our ENTSO-E president and the president of EDSO will also take part in the event. So don't forget to register, and please join us on Friday for this wonderful event. Allow me to close this this webinar. Lucas, thank you very much for your time and for your presentation. Let me just remind everyone that the Summer Outlook 2021 is available on our website, on the Seasonal Outlook webpage of ENTSO-E. And if you have any questions related to the content of the Summer Outlook 2021, please send an email to Lukasz, who will be more than happy to answer all of your questions. I thank all of you for your participation and for taking the time to attend this webinar, and see you next time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Luca,
Thank
also
you.
for supporting
Thank you.
me. Have a nice day.
Pleasure. Have a nice day, everyone. Bye.